Hello, hello, and welcome to the Finding the Unicorn in You podcast. What a beautiful day to inspire lives. My name is Jaime Raygoza, your host, and I am so excited to have you here. Let's get ready to meet some fantastic unicorns and learn how to unleash the inner unicorn in you. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Finding the Unicorn in You. Today, I have a very special guest. He started off as a teacher and transitioned himself in several different positions, and now his own practice called Cynoshare Counseling and Coaching. I'll let him talk all about it. So I have Neville Sparwick.
Thanks, Jamie. How are you?
I'm doing well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you opened up your own practice and how you got here?
Oh, that's a very long story. So career-wise, from the age of 4, I had an aspiration to be an elementary school teacher. I spent all of my schooling working towards that, knowing that's what I wanted to be. Now, within a year and a half, I plummeted into burnout. I had walked into a school situation that had very high expectations and didn't necessarily have enough support. I basically threw my all in and then got into a situation where I was told that my performance wasn't up to par, which devastated me. And it was like, I
Yeah.
don't really quite know how to deal with that. Then took a year off the teaching field, went and got experience in doing temp work. So I got to see a whole bunch of organizations as an admin person and picked up a whole lot of admin skills. Realized that I didn't really want to be an admin person.
Hmm.
Okay. So I went to do substitute teaching, and this will be my test. And if I struggle with the substitute teaching, then it will tell me that I probably am not cut out to be a classroom teacher. I did really well. I actually was invited back to different places and got offered a contract out of my substitute teaching experiences, which then led to another contract. And then I had the opportunity to go overseas. So I did, and ended up going to the UK for 18 months, continued to do some teaching in the UK, but struggled. I'd reached the point where I don't know if I want to be in teaching anymore. The things that had drawn me into teaching were not the things that I was dealing with. It wasn't fun. It wasn't fun at all. Just lots of pressure to produce results and to demonstrate that you were actually a good teacher, and feeling like anyone and everyone had an opinion about how you should be operating. And that just wasn't working for me at all. So I left teaching and again was in a position of, now what do I do? Hang on. So came back for a visit to Australia, and the college where I'd done my teaching, they were offering a counseling degree. It was as if this course had been tailor-made. I could not believe how many things that were interesting for me were showing up in this one course. So I ended up making the decision and did my counseling degree, started seeing clients in 2008, and then was working for an organization that was assisting people who are long-term unemployed and helping them to work through their barriers to employment and helping them to find a pathway toward employment. Did that for almost 4 years, and then was starting to see signs of burnout again. I wasn't really quite sure if I could do anything about it. I had shuffled my schedule around. I had cut down the number of days. I had done a whole bunch of things to try and make sure that I stayed well, but I was still feeling like something's going on here, and I don't think I can stay here much longer. We had a team building day, what ended up being my last team building day with the organization. And the facilitator of the team building day asked us to use craft materials to go and create a symbol for where we are at the moment and where we'd like to be. And I was like, I really don't want to do this. It's tired. The team building day had to call on a day off. And I was just like, not in the best frame of mind to even be there. But I thought, so the last 2 minutes that we had to go and do this, I went and whipped together some pipe cleaners and created this kite. I thought, that will do. Well, that ended up speaking to me the whole day about where I was at. And it was like, don't mess with symbols. I'll just tell you that. Just don't mess with symbols because they will get you. And the kite, the conclusion I came to on the team building day was that I was quite happy to be the kite. I didn't feel that anything needed to change about that, but I felt like I needed a longer string. So I wanted to fly higher. But I felt like I was being restrained. I came to the realization that maybe I need to cut the string. And so I came home from the team building day, picked up my wife from the bus station when she came home from work. And I said, I think I need to resign and start a practice. And my wife's response, which floored both of us, was like, that's what you need to do. That's what you need to do. And I'll support. And she tells me afterwards, she's going, I could not believe the words were coming out of my mouth. And I'm sitting there going, I didn't expect it to be that receptive. It was just, okay, let's go there. So I handed in my resignation. And then at the beginning of 2014, I officially launched the practice. But yeah, it's been quite the journey.
Definitely very wild and all the trajectories that your life went in.
Mm.
And I know you mentioned quite already that you went through symptoms, if not went through the whole cycle of burnout.
Mhm.
For our listeners that don't really know that concept very well, what is burnout and what are some of the things that you went through while you had it?
Burnout, in essence, is basically a mental, emotional, you could call it a nervous breakdown, but it may not necessarily be that severe. There's a spectrum. And for me, my experience was I got to the end of my first year of teaching and then got this really terrible feedback. I struggled with that and I was running out of energy. One of the things that started to happen for me was about in the first, after the first quarter, I was finding myself coming home from work with a pile of work to do and I couldn't do anything. I would just sit there and I'd stare at the wall all night. And that was, and I thought was aware that was going on. But and I could just barely plan for my next day. I couldn't see any further than the next day. And I was just like, I was just really becoming quite shattered around the whole thing. I don't even know how I managed to do that last term. And so I got sick. I had 3 days where I came down with the flu and I sat there at home pretty sick and suddenly realized that it was the first time all year that I had come home and I didn't have a pile of work to do and that I had actually stopped. And that was a bit of an eye opener for me where it's just like, why don't I get this very often? What's going on here for me? And
Mhm.
so I thought I probably need to go and talk about the possibility of changing my role or doing something. So I'm just looking at this, this is not sustainable. And so I'm sitting there with the expectations, but also my own anger around the situation I felt I'd been put in. And those two things were just tearing me down internally and chewing through all of my energy. I had made the decision that I needed to resign. I'd made a big long list of what's my reasons to stay and what's my reasons to go. My reasons to stay, I think I had two. My reasons to go, I had about a page and a half, and it probably could have kept going if I wanted to. And of all the reasons why I shouldn't be there anymore. And so I decided to resign. I gave 5 weeks notice and left in the middle of the year, which was really hard for me because I had made a verbal commitment to the school that I would be there for
Yeah.
2 years. And I looked at where I was at and realized if I hold myself to that, I think I'm going to be going out in a box. And that was my thinking at the moment. It's just, I don't think I'm actually going to make it to the end of the year. I'm not sure that I was thinking suicide, but I was certainly realizing that
Something was going to
I,
happen.
something was going to happen and that my health was on edge and that I couldn't push myself to make it to the end of the year. It was not going to be good. And it was not going to be good just for me. It was not going to be good. It was also not going to be good for the students in my class and the parent. And ironically, the parents and the students that particular year were the best class I'd ever worked with. And I was like, that was the really hard part for me was to let go of that and to feel like I'm failing them. And I got told on the last day that I was there at the school, oh, you do know that statistically children that lose their teacher midway through the year perform more poorly.
Oh, wow.
And I was fuming because it's just like, how dare you? And it was just like, yeah. And there was somebody next to me who heard the comment and looked at me as I was, that's really weird. Never followed up on it, but it was just interesting. So that was just that whole thing, like the burnout thing. It took a while to work my way through it. And there were some physical aspects to that where it was just like, just not enough energy. There was some mental, emotional stuff where it was about confidence and processing stuff and about just not having the desire to go and put myself in a situation where I might be hurt again. There was a lot of stuff that was really scary for me after that experience. It's just like, and the temping experience that I went into was for me a safe way to get back into work because it's like, there's no commitment here. It's like, if I don't like it, I don't have to stay. And, and that was really important for me for a while that I needed to have an out and needed to know that I had an out. And there's a lot of processing through with friends and I wish at the time that I had known about counseling because I probably would have benefited from that at the time, but I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of that as an option. And yeah, but strangely enough, it did start opening the door for me to start considering, is counseling an option? I started to hear about this thing called counseling. I didn't know any counselors. I didn't know anybody who had accessed one, but started looking at that as that sounds interesting. And it put a little spark there that I was like, didn't think I was ready for that, but certainly it created a bit of this is a possible alternative, and let's just put that on the back burner and see how that goes and see what happens with that. So fast forward like another 10 years, and it was like, there was the opportunity.
And
Hmm.
I've also, it's strange the way you're saying all of these things that you felt, just because I've gone through burnout a few times myself as well over the
Mm.
past 10, 15 years. And in a sense, you feel like you're just a walking like body with like your mind
Yeah.
somewhere else. You're just
You're a
doing,
zombie.
yes, you're a zombie. You're an autopilot. And for me, my biggest pivot was that I was so tired.
Yep.
I was driving home late from work, and every day I was going into my job, I was staying later and later because that
Yeah.
was the expectation.
Yep.
And there was a point where my boss said I was working at a shelter, and he's just bring your change of clothes and just stay here. Just like sleep the night here. We have a shower, just get food Ubered in. I was just like, wow. And I was like, no, I need to. That was my one thing. If I was going to sleep, I needed to sleep in my bed.
Yep.
So I was driving home and I was exhausted and I fell asleep on the wheel and I was this close into crashing. And I was
Wow.
just like, oh, wow, no, like I had a near death experience and I cannot let this take me away.
Wow.
It took me 2 years. I'm going into my third year now of me really putting in a lot of work on therapy, a lot of self care to get
Mm.
over burnout. And I've heard the
Mm.
statistic, it takes 3 to 5 years to get
Mm.
over burnout. And I didn't believe it until I experienced.
Yeah. And I think for me, that first experience happened in my 20s. I'm 50 now. And I'm looking at it still has remnants of effect on
Mhm.
my life. And there is this whole thing. Part of my reason for going into private practice and setting up my own business was so that I had more control over my time and I could manage my energy better because I was very aware that my energy I hadn't bounced back. The first experience of burnout, I think I did to a degree, but then I had another round. 2001 was probably the worst year of my life. And there was just, if anything were to go wrong, it was that year that it went wrong. So I had this accumulation of things that went on. So that compounded the experience of burnout. And I think there was possibly a level of burnout in there, but I didn't have the luxury in that particular instance to take time out. So I just had to keep going because my situation was tenuous
Mhm.
on so many different levels that I just didn't have the ability to create space to stop. And that, I think, 20 years down the line, I think I'm finally at a point where I'm realizing I can stop being so cautious about my energy.
If you had the opportunity to go back and give yourself advice where it would have made one of these transitions easier for you, what advice would you give yourself?
I'm actually not sure what advice I would give myself because I think in the end I found out what I needed to do. I think I probably wouldn't have stayed as long.
Okay.
I would probably say it's like if you pay attention to how you're feeling and stop trying to push through it. Because with the teaching role that I had, I was angry. I was feeling really controlled. I was feeling trapped in the situation. And there were nuances within that particular context that I had absolutely no say in.
Mm.
And I tried to go and voice concerns and voice stuff like that and got basically dismissed and then got treated as the problem child. And then having the rug pulled out from under my feet from the year before, it was just like I went into that second year feeling like I had to prove that I was not what they said, which added extra pressure. And I was already a bit of a perfectionist anyway. So here was this whole thing of, I guess my advice was like, it's not necessarily a reflection on you that you
Okay.
have to leave.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us feel so guilty
Mhm.
leaving a job. We have this sense of loyalty that
Yeah.
we have to be
Yeah.
there for them, but they'll replace us it like in a snap of fingers.
And they did. Yep,
Yes.
they did. And so the loyalty was there, and that was inculcated growing up. That it was just like you respect authority and
Mm.
you keep your word. And that was a really big deal for me. As I said, told the school I would be there for 2 years. And here I am resigning 6 months early. And it was just like, and I really had to work through that. And it was interesting. I had an opportunity the following year to come back to that particular school and do a short term contract with them. And they were going to make me jump through a whole bunch of hoops. And I remember walking out of that situation when they told me what they wanted me to do and going, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. And that was it. That was interesting. It was interesting just hearing that voice come to me as you don't have to
Mhm.
prove anything. It's okay. And I walked away from that. I never went back to that school again. But it was just interesting because it's like there was a part of me that's going, oh, let's go and like hair of the dog. Let's go back and work in the space that hurts you. Let's see if that works a second time. And it's, yeah, no, it's not going to work. And so I guess I was learning to trust my gut. And there was a long period of time where I wouldn't. And I think that that was part of what led to my burnout was that there were all of these things jangling inside of me saying, it's like, there's something really wrong here. This is not working for you and you can't stay here. If you stay here, it's going to do more damage. And yeah, it was actually really interesting. It was really interesting when my resignation was announced to the school, which was a week before this term ended. I had one of the parents of my children came up to me and said, I'm really sorry to see you go, but I think they burned you out in your first year. And I just stared at him and I just thought, I can't even tell you how true that is. I felt like I was, yeah, I was very much gagged in that context to talk about what was really going on. But it was like other people saw it. And that was really helpful for me to know that it wasn't just me.
So for someone that is going through a similar situation and they may be going through symptoms of burnout, what advice would you that would tell them to ease them through the process?
I would tell them to, first of all, give yourself some slack, create some space for yourself if you can, that where you can actually sit back and look at what is going on. Because sometimes we get caught in a situation where we take on ourselves this whole sense of I'm responsible for all of these things and I can't walk away. Mm. There are people that are depending upon me or projects that are depending upon me or this, that, and the other. And we put ourselves in that situation and the circumstances and the context in which we're in there will feed on that. So whether they mean to or not. So if you're noticing that you're not doing so well, one of the first things I would recommend is finding space to sit there and get a bit more of a big picture sense of what's going on here. Pay attention to your feelings. If you're feeling exhausted, if you're feeling like you're developing a very short fuse, if you're feeling really flat and you just can't seem to find any energy, that's really important to pay attention to. Don't push through it because all that's going to do is compound those feelings. Like they're telling you something and you need to listen. And if you don't, you're going to end up with something much stronger to really let you know that your near death experience is one. Hopefully people don't experience on a regular basis, but that your body, something will give you a big wake up call if you don't listen. The feelings are signals. They're telling you something and they're not there for no reason. So make some space to to get the big picture and pay attention to what your emotions are telling you. And then I would recommend also uh, making sure that you have a network of people who are not connected to the context who can give you some kind of feedback as to what they're observing. The last situation with employment for me, I had friends of mine that were sitting there going, you just seem stressed all the time. And to recognize that this was spilling over into lots of other areas was a bit of a warning signal for me. It's like the stress isn't staying at work. The stress is coming home and it's coming into all my relationships. And so that's also really important. And having the people who will support you if you make decisions to leave, because there are some people that won't.
Oh,
Let's face it, not everybody will think that
mhm.
you're doing the right thing. But having people who see you and recognize what's happening for you and are willing to support you, whatever decision you make, is going to be really critical because we can't carry it on. And that was part of my problem in that context is that I didn't have a very big network. But most of the people that I knew were connected to the school that I was working at. And so therefore it's like, where did I have a space to be anything but a school teacher? Mm. And that was really hard, really hard. And one of the reasons that I had listed on my reasons to go was just that I can't be myself. I'm always wearing this badge of you're the school teacher wherever I go at this particular moment in time. And it's just not helping. And I tried to go on negotiations, some stuff around that and fell on deaf ears. And yeah, it was really interesting. Yeah. So the advice, pay attention to your emotions, create some space if you can, and make sure you have a
Mhm.
supportive network who are going to stick with you because things can get rocky.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of those. And it's so easy for people at your work to tell you to stay. But
Oh, yeah.
and a lot of it is a little selfish because it's them that's getting impacted by you leaving. So they want it
Yep.
to not get that bad for them. So they're like, please stay because then you're making my life convenient. But they're not
Mm.
looking for what's best out for you. So you always have to
Yeah.
put yourself first. Like I
Yeah.
said before, there's no loyalty. You have to be loyal to yourself and say,
Mm.
this is my boundary. This is my mental health. I need to work on it.
Mm. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And the whole sense of being true to yourself, I think is really important because I think the workplace will often put you into boxes and force you into molds that may not fit. And you don't always realize that at the time. It's like, this is what we do. This is what everybody's doing in this context, which is what I was
Mhm.
telling myself a lot of the time. But it was like, and I found out later that there were other people that went and had breakdowns after I left. And it was like, okay, so it wasn't just me. That was not great for them, but it was just a realization. There's something about the context. And it was funny when I did my counseling degree, one of my electives, which was an unintentional elective, was on conflict resolution and mediation type of stuff. And for one of my assessments, I actually sat there and processed through what had happened from a systemic type of view of what was happening in that context. And that was for in hindsight and having had quite a number of years of distance from the event, it was really interesting to go and look at that and realize, wow, I had a part to play in that, but honestly, there was a whole bunch of other things that were going on that I couldn't have anything about. And the best thing I could have done was to leave. I couldn't stay there. I could not stay in that context because it was going to destroy me to stay there. Yeesh.
That's definitely the process. And we have to take time to heal and we have to put in the time.
Yeah. And I think that's an important word that you put in there. It's a healing process. There's been an injury that's happened when burnout happens. It's not you've done something wrong necessarily. And you do need to pay attention to what have I contributed to that. But the trying to tease out what my role was and what was the contextual role is actually going to be quite important. Because I know when I left, I took on pretty well 100% of the responsibility for getting myself in that position. And it was not
Mhm.
until I started getting some wake up calls from other people to say, it's, oh, you were doing way more than you should have been doing. And how on earth did you manage to go on for as long as you did? That it was just like, hang on. So that wasn't normal. That wasn't appropriate. That wasn't necessarily the right thing that was going on for in that context for me, and helped to reframe a whole bunch of things. And to say, yes, I did come in. I had very strong i- perfectionist ideals and really wanted to do my best and give my all and do all that kind of stuff. But I didn't know myself well enough at that point and didn't know what my limits were. And so I gave more than I should have. And yeah, and probably just adding to the advice is also about knowing where your boundaries are and
Yeah.
making sure your boundaries are clear because mine were not clear. And interestingly enough, I look back and realize that I pushed back on quite a lot of things in that context. There were
Mm.
things that I was being pressured to take on board that I said no and refused to do, but that there was a limit to how much I could do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it was one of the things is like if there's anger showing up, that's a really clear sign that a boundary is being violated in
Exactly.
some way, shape, or form. So anger is not a bad thing. Anger can be a really great signal that something needs to change. This is not working. This is not right. Mm.
And this kind of it's a good transition into my last question. In the whole premise of this podcast is finding the unicorn in people. I feel that one thing I do want to change the question just a tad, just to stay on topic, is people who are trying to be unicorns to be the best version of themselves, they think that they have to do the most. They have to always say yes, always take the opportunity. But in this sense, if you keep doing that, it may lead to burnout because there's lack of boundaries. You're overworking yourself. You're not respecting your body or your mind. So what advice would you say? Can someone still try to be the tap into their inner unicorn and do that without crossing that boundary into burnout?
I'd say the answer is yes. And I've got to deviate for a little second here because one of the things that I have been doing over the last couple of years has been providing a space to support other therapists who are in private practice. Because what I found, particularly here in Australia, but is that a lot of counselors end up going into private practice by default because they can't find a role that suits. But like me, they went into practice with no business experience at all. And so they're starting from scratch and they don't know what they don't know. One of the things that has come out of that for me is just the awareness of a business model that trying to work out how much background you need to be able to understand. I went and did some networking in the third and fourth year that I was in business, and we got some professional development through the networking group which was good. It was really helpful, and I was introduced to this idea of a business model, and they used this whole thing of the three-legged stool, and the three-legged stool being the successful business is built on three things. It's built on your expertise, it's built on your business systems and processes, and it's built on your marketing. I thought that was a great visual to sit there and conceptualize what it is that a business is supposed to be. And a few years down the track, I realized that it was actually oversimplified. It's okay. Yes, those three things are very important and they do undergird a successful business, but they're not the only things. And they contribute to other parts of the business that often get overlooked if you just focus on those three. So I changed the model and I added in a fourth leg. And the fourth leg is your self care, because it's like you're a business owner. And if you're a sole operator, your business health is directly tied to your own health. And if you're not taking care of you, you cannot take care of your business effectively.
Mhm.
So I added that leg in to make that an intentional part of what's going on. So the people who are trying to develop their unicorn, I would say, add that fourth leg in. You have great ideas, you have wonderful abilities, and you have limits, and you need to know them. And you need to know what to do with those limits. It's not a case of pushing harder, pushing longer, pushing. You will hit a wall and you will head to burnout if you do not have the supports in place to be able to effectively manage your well-being. And this is not about, I go and schedule in a massage once a month. No, you've got to be more strategic than that. It's about paying attention to what are my signs that tell me that I'm needing a break? What are the things that I'm going to put in place that are going to allow me to step away from my business without my business suffering? Or is it going to be okay for my business to exist for a while without my direct input? And
Mhm.
working through those kind of issues, because one of the traps with the business is that the business can take over your life.
Yeah.
And you could be on call for the business 24/7 if you let it. And
Yeah.
you can't let that happen because that's going to destroy you, particularly if there are unexpected curveballs that turn up in business, and they do. Yeah. And so you need to put some things in place. You need to think about the idea of like, where can I delegate some of my work so that I'm not carrying the entire load? And maybe early on, there's not an option for that, and that's okay. But you need to think about that. And that needs to be something you need to be heading toward. It's like, how do I release myself from the burden of managing every single aspect of this business? And that also requires a bit of I need to trust other people with this thing that I'm creating, because that can be really hard to let go of. And the whole sense of this is mine, this is my baby. I don't want, I don't know what someone else is going to do with it.
Yeah.
That's, you need to work through that because it will drive you to burnout if you don't find some alternatives.
And I think that's great, great advice. You have to take care of yourself, take a step back. And I think a lot of us do think that, oh, a simple massage or me taking a nap or I'm going to take it easy just today is going to be a fix. But you have to do a systems change, it's a habit that you have to put into your daily life cycle.
You need to have a really clear vision about what that looks like. I mean, what I'm finding myself saying to people that I'm working with in the private practice space, you need to have a very clear vision of not just what your business looks like, but the life that you're wanting to create. And the life that you're wanting to create is going to be the healthiest, best one for you. And your business is facilitating
Mhm.
that. You're not sacrificing your life for the business. The business is helping you to create this life that you want. So asking questions about like, how much money do I want to earn? Is money going to be the biggest driver for me? Maybe I can be happy with 60K. Maybe that will be sufficient. And so that because I'm working towards this figure and not say 120 or 150 or 300K, I can take some pressure off. It's like
Mhm.
I can live on this. And if I get more than that, great. But maybe this is a minimum. And it could be also how many hours do I want to work and actually being very specific. Like for me, I have chosen with my practice to sit there and say, it's like, I don't want to be working 5 days a week. I know that when I worked in the generalist counsellor role that I did 4.5 days a week at my peak and I wasn't coping with that. So I don't want to be in the position where I'm not coping with my work and I don't enjoy coming to work anymore and feeling like I have to. So that will, so that puts some boundaries then around, okay, how many client sessions am I going to offer in a day? And how many client sessions am I going to make available in a week? What is the most that I'm prepared to handle? And that's the beauty of being in the business space. Is I can choose. People might say, people might use this badge of honor thing. I get to see 7 clients a day and I fill them all. Good for you. I'm glad you can make that work. That's not
Mhm.
going to work for me.
Yeah.
And so it's just like taking the pressure off. I don't have to, my business doesn't have to look like someone else's business.
Mhm.
I don't have to achieve the same results that someone else is doing. I need to be happy with what I'm doing and I need to
Mhm.
make sure that it supports the life that I'm trying to create. So if that means I need to reassess my pricing structure, then I do that. If that means I need to facilitate some changes in how I do things and streamline some processes so it's not so manual, then I do that. But if I'm happy to do that and that's the kind of thing that supports the life that I want to live, then I don't need to change that. But I do need to ask the question. I do need to ask the question. And what is it that I'm going to pull in to support me to create this and to reduce me having to be so hands-on with absolutely every piece of my business.
This has been such a good conversation, and I can probably pick your brain for another few hours. But if somebody wants to get in contact with you, or if they have further questions regarding the subject, how can they get in contact with you?
Probably one of the best ways to reach me is to go through LinkedIn and connect with me on LinkedIn. I made the decision at this point in time not to have a website, and I'm in the process of having to rethink that because there may be some value in it now, but yeah, right now I don't have a website, so I'm on Facebook. I have a business page on Facebook for Cynosure Counseling and Coaching, and I also have my LinkedIn profile where you can connect with me there. And in both options there, if you wanted to set up a Zoom call with me, I've got a scheduling tool that will allow you to do that, creates a Zoom link and that adjusts people's time zones. Yeah. So
Perfect.
feel that because you're living in another country that you can't access me.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And if I'll leave all of those links in the show notes so people can just easily access you. And any last piece of advice that you want people to leave before we end the show?
Life is short. Nothing is wasted. And yeah, just because you go through a hard period of your life or go through a difficult circumstance, it doesn't mean that you have failed. So as long as you sit there and you process through and you make the time to bilk the situation for all the learning you can get from it, if nothing else, it'll tell you what not to do. And that's useful and valuable. And I could, yeah, that nothing is wasted is one of the themes that I just keep coming back to. I'm so amazed when I look back over my life to realize things that I did way back in my 20s, I dropped for a while and then have reemerged in different spaces. Or there were ideas like the counseling idea. The seed was dropped in the 20s. It took 10, 12 years or something to emerge out of that, but it was there. And the skills were there to support that when I moved into business. I had all of the skills to be able to do that. And I still had to learn stuff. It's not like it's been a free ride, but everything that you walk through has value, even if it's hard.
Thank you so much for everything. And for our listeners, if you like this content, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. We're have an episode every Friday at 7 a.m. And until next time, thank you once again for everything and see you next week.